I'm Nikhil and I'm going to demo federated services. So let's see. I have this cluster called 1A and I have Nginx replica sets and Nginx service running in my cluster. So with this, any pod within this cluster has access to this service and they can access it using, they can just do a nginx.myns lookup and they'll be able to access my Nginx pods. In this case, my Nginx pods just reply back saying where are they being served from, and in this case, they're just being served from the same cluster. So this works great for a Kubernetes cluster, but the problem is, let's say I have a bad config push or so by mistake I delete my Nginx replica sets from this cluster. So what happens is there are no pods backing my service. And now if I do a get on that nginx.myns service, I won't get a response because those pods don't exist. So my service has gone down and this is bad. This is where federation and federated services can help. In my case, I have this 1A cluster. I also have an identical 1F cluster with the same Nginx and replica sets and services. I use my 1A cluster to serve, let's say, users from US, and I use this other 1F cluster to serve rest of the world. Now what I can do is I can use, since I have this Nginx service running in the other cluster, I can use this as a failover for the service in 1A. How do I do that? I set up federation. So here I have a federation control plane running and I've registered both of my clusters as part of this federation. And the same Nginx service that was running in those clusters, I've also set up a federated service with the same name and the same namespace and everything. So in any pod in any of this cluster, instead of accessing nginx.mynx, I access the federation service, which is accessed using its full name, which is the service name dot namespace name dot federation name dot svc dot cluster dot local. And if I get that, see, I am being served from my 1F cluster. So note that there is going to be increased latency, increased network cost, because now my request is going from cluster 1A to cluster 1F. So there is additional cost, but at least there's no downtime for my users. They still get access to this service. And later on, let's say I figure out the problem and I get back my local replica sets back in my 1A cluster. So what will happen? All my pods who want access to that service, they'll continue to use the same DNS name, which is nginx.myns.federation.svc.cluster.local. But now, since there are local replica sets, they'll be served from the same cluster. Now, this request is not going to 1F cluster, and I can, instead of wget, I can do ns lookup, and I see it returned me the local cluster IP. So the request never went out of this cluster. This cluster itself figured out there is a local service, so it served it. There are pods in this local cluster, so it served using those pods. When there weren't, it failed over to 1F cluster. This is how we get highly available distributed services. It's awesome.